Well, good morning, everyone. We are delighted that you've joined us today for a special summit focused on enterprise security operations, the needs, challenges, and opportunities. My name is Sarbari Gupta, and I'm the founder and CEO of Electrosoft. Electrosoft is proud to be the host for this event as a part of our ongoing cyber series. In fact, this is our fifth virtual cyber-focused event in the last 2 years. Full video recordings for previous events can be found on our website under the resources page. I'm delighted to kick off our event this morning. Today's program will convey insights and best practices for addressing evolving challenges and opportunities in implementing enterprise security operations, or SOCs as they're called, Security Operations Centers. We have an exciting schedule for today's event and a lineup of outstanding speakers. However, before I introduce the next speaker, I'd like to share a few thoughts about our company, Electrosoft, as well as a few observations about enterprise security operations. Okay, so about Electrosoft. So serving federal government customers since 2001, Electrosoft delivers comprehensive technology-based services and solutions with a strong focus on cybersecurity. We have several important industry process certifications, including ISO 9001 and CMMI Level 3. Our competencies span a broad range of IT professional services, with cybersecurity and identity management being our deepest areas of expertise. We are fortunate to have a number of contract vehicles and GWACs to serve our many customers in the defense and civilian sectors. Next, I would like to share a few thoughts about our focus for the day, namely enterprise security operations, or SOCs. So this first slide talks about the typical functions in a SOC. So first and foremost is threat detection, analysis, and forensics related to the activities going on the network and the systems that are part of the IT environment. Endpoint protection is also another significant component of enterprise security operations, and that is all about protecting the laptops, the workstations, the servers that are part of the network for that organization. Now, compliance and vulnerability management, that refers to making sure that the configurations and settings on the various systems and endpoints on that network are in compliance with government regulations and are secure from a vulnerability and risk perspective. Data loss prevention, or DLP, refers to how to protect sensitive data from being exfiltrated from the organization inappropriately. And the final bullet, security architecture and special projects, that's about making sure that the organization's overarching IT architecture promotes cybersecurity and a strong posture of security. Now, some of the challenges that arise in enterprise security operations include getting buy-in and support from executive leadership, for this very expensive function within an organization. Hiring and training SOC analysts is also a difficult proposition, because, as we all know, there's a far higher demand for cyber trained and cyber skilled technicians and analysts than there is supply. And moreover, once you hire them, how to keep their skills up to speed, through adequate training throughout the time that they're with the organization. Another challenge that arises often in a SOC environment is the high volume of false alerts. So all the tools that are used in a typical SOC, they're constantly raising alarms and alerts, about potential threats in the environment. And often the SOC analysts get kind of fatigued by the high volume of alerts, and they may miss an important alert. The fourth point there, unified dashboard for tools. Now, again, as I just mentioned, there's a bunch of tools that are used in a typical SOC, and each comes with its own little dashboard, right? However, to get a comprehensive and consolidated view of the security posture for the organization, it is important to have a way to bring together the different outputs from the tools and to have a unified dashboard that can provide leadership with a real-time view of the security posture of the organization. And the final challenge is it's often difficult to establish what success looks like for a SOC, the success metrics, and to convince, again, higher level leadership that it is doing a good thing and the funds are being well spent. Finally, the opportunities, within the SOC sort of environment or in this space, what are the opportunities to do better? So of course, as we keep hearing AI and ML in almost every sector of our lives, but certainly automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning can be applied here in this space as well, especially given that there are far few qualified SOC analysts and a lot of tools. So SOAR, security, orchestration, automation, and response is the name of platforms that allow automated response to certain well-known or typical IOCs, indicators of compromise. So those are good things to reduce the number of personnel needed in typical SOCs. And then cloud-based SOCs versus on-prem SOCs, So as the workforce is more and more moving into a remote environment, it is very useful to have the SOC tools in a cloud-based environment so that the analysts can reach them from anywhere. They don't have to be in a glass enclosed operations center to do their work. And finally, outsourcing to managed service providers, especially for smaller organizations, implementing a SOC can be a daunting proposition. So outsourcing it when it makes sense is a very good idea. Okay, next slide, please. I'd like to thank our event sponsor, Foxhole Technology, for their support, and they will be speaking on the panel as well. Next slide. And then without further ado, I'd like to introduce our colleague, Brett Tucker, Technical Manager, Cyber Risk at Carnegie Mellon University. So join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Brett Tucker.
Thanks, Dr. Gupa. It's really a pleasure as representative for the university to participate in this event. So thank you so much. At Carnegie Mellon University, as you all know, we are one of the world's leading institutions in terms of computer engineering and AI, cybersecurity. We've been ranked relatively high in terms of at least being in the game, in terms of computer science, data analytics. So people have reached out to us, not just from the perspective of the United States, but globally, to find leaders in our organization that can not only educate the public in terms of these great topics, but also to forge that new horizon in terms of where the science is actually going. And on the next slide, you'll see that I actually not only represent the institution as far as being a professor at the university, but I also am a manager of a research portfolio at the Software Engineering Institute. Now, the Software Engineering Institute is not a degree issuing institution, it is a research institution. It's a federally funded research and development center, and we are sponsored by the United States Department of Defense to specialize in areas pertaining to software engineering, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and new technologies. And we act as a broker of information that comes from the private sector, from academia, and from the government itself to advise the government in terms of what are the best technologies and solutions that they may seek. And we do this agnostic of vendor or anything like that. We are truly looking for the ground truth of what is the best solution for our most daunting challenges for our nation. On the next slide, you'll see that I actually am down in another part of that organization, because the SEI is relatively big as a research institution. Back around 1988 or so, by the way, as the SEI was formed in 1984, this is only a couple of years down the road, we had the Morris Worm pop up. And it was one of the first initial cybersecurity events that really was the first hammer strike in forging our institution. And we built CERT. And that is the division that I'm actually representing today. CERT still specializes in matters pertaining to cybersecurity and doing research related to any solutions for that field. Now, we eventually transitioned US CERT to the US federal government, but the moniker stuck. And we are working in partnership with US government, private industry, and we operate as a nonprofit looking to advance any research matters pertaining to cybersecurity. It can span from industry to government to military. And we look for the leading edge technology too. We're looking at the 10, 20, 30-year window of where we believe the technology is going. So that way we're keeping our eyes on that distant horizon for not just for the government, but for the world in general. And on the next slide, you'll see too that we have very specific focus areas for our research. We're looking to advance the design of security stacks and making sure that enduring challenges such as measurement, quantification of risk, and the science is if ever evolving. And we're looking to build more resilient organizations. I like to say that the risk chicken bears the resilience egg, and we're trying to make that egg tastier and better for the world. So we're trying to find new solutions for organizations to help them through those dark times so that they may be able to bounce back and continue their operations in an uninhibited manner. And we want to move the market in that regard. We want to influence the marketplace to help everybody so the water brings up all boats in terms of level. So that way we have new bars set for enemies to have to overcome to penetrate and actually deprecate our networks. And we're looking to shape the future in that regard. Next slide. Thanks. Within that, I specialize in cyber risk and resilience. That's the directorate that I'm in. And we have a number of services that we can provide in terms of cyber assurance, risk management, which is my area of specialization. And we also have a very robust insider risk team. Some examples, we have the director of the National Insider Threat Task Force that is on our staff. We also have some folks who have written a number of standards related to resilience management model. Myself, I've published on the Octave Forte risk management framework. It's connecting cyber executives to enterprise risk models. So we do that kind of work too to help organizations, whether they're nascent or whether they're more advanced, understand the maturity as to how they can address risk challenges and matters. So on that last slide, I just want to leave you off with this idea that we're out there. We're going to be at the IEEE conference next week. I'm going to be at the RSA conference at the beginning of June. So please feel free to reach out to us. Use these links. Look for the tools that we're publishing. Look for the publications that we're putting out quite regularly. We have a very active blog site. We have white papers and technical papers, all free and accessible to the public. So I welcome you to explore those, and also to feel free to reach out to me if you need any connections into our organization so we can help you advance your cybersecurity stack.
Okay, so I think it's back to me. So thank you very much, Brett, for that fine presentation and introduction to cybersecurity work going on within your organization at Carnegie Mellon University. And now I guess let's move on to a few housekeeping items. In terms of press policy, we welcome our friends and colleagues from the press, but as a reminder, today's session is on the record. In terms of questions, if you have a question, simply open the Q&A tab on your webinar toolbar and type in your question. We will strive to include questions from the audience throughout the keynote as well as the panel sessions. If you're having any technical difficulties, feel free to use the chat box in your toolbar to chat with the webinar host, and he will be able to help you. And finally, we have a brief survey that we will include at the end of this session to capture your feedback on our webinar and to help us to continually improve what we do in these sessions that we are putting out. We would appreciate it if you could take a few moments at the end to complete the survey. And thank you in advance for doing that. And finally, I guess this recording is on demand. So today's session will be recorded with the link available and on demand for your viewing pleasure soon on the Electrosoft website. So stay tuned. The next segment of our session today is, of course, the panel presentation. So it is now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Kevin Thomas, Senior Vice President at Electrosoft, who will facilitate the next segment of our session. A warm welcome, please, for Kevin Thomas and all of our panelists. Kevin, take it from there.
Thanks so much for the warm welcome, Sabari. I really appreciate that. So I'm excited to be moderating our discussion today on the panel. We will be talking about challenges to building an effective SOC. Again, I'm really excited about this opportunity. I know that looking at different cyber operations, looking at emerging threats and the information that we just heard from our colleagues over at Army, it really puts and instills that need for that effective cyber operations capability. So today I'd like to introduce our exceptionally qualified and experienced panelists. So first we have Mr. Tagai Andrews. He is the Chief Information Security Officer at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. Also, we have Mr. Gerald J. Corone, and he is the Chief Information Officer and the Assistant IG, that's Inspector General for Information Technology for the Department of Health and Human Services. We also have Mr. Jamie Holcomb, who's the Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And then last but not least, we have Mr. Wes Postol, who is the Vice President for Strategy with Foxhole Technology. So as we have come into this panel and we're thinking about cyber operations, I would want to encourage two quick things. First, reminding everyone that the previous housekeeping rules still are in effect. And along with that, if you have any questions, please jump into the chat and add any questions you may have. And as time allows, we'll try to bring them into the conversation. So would definitely encourage that. Also, as we look at the discussion today, I've sort of sorted the elements out initially that we can kind of dive into, and I've taken an approach from the project management body of knowledge. So looking at people, processes, technology, and then also looking at mission and business elements. I think because of our panelists' unique experience, I think they could really shed some light on that mission and business element that we might not always get some insight on. So perhaps we'll start with that mission and business elements area there. And so the first question for discussion are, what types of messaging enable senior management understand the value of Security Operations Center or cyber ops? So if you were trying to pitch this to get budgetary approval, you prepped your GS-15 or some other role like that, what would you do to kind of help get that messaging collected and put forth the value of having this capability? Mr. Holcomb, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. The fact of the matter is, the best time to ask for anything is after a security breach. Isn't that so true, right? I mean, the only time people listen is when you're in an urgent crisis. Why do we have to do that? So the thing is to try as best you can to provide a reasonable and logical example of how you can be breached. Because guess what? It's not if, it's when. And if you don't have that conversation at the higher levels, you will get breached and it will be bad. So the fact of the matter is, you have to prepare and you have to actually run those exercises like it really happened. And in order to get the monies required and the budget, you have to appeal to somebody's better senses. And then you have to actually put realistic scenarios in front, because the world is not falling. The sky is not falling. That's not what we're talking about. But what if you had a ransomware attack in this one place? What would you do? What happens when you have a hacker defacing one of your websites? How are you going to react and what are you going to do? Because again, it's not, oh, I'm never going to be breached. It's what are you going to do when it happens? And see, so many people are defensive in posture. You can't be like that. You can't be reactive. You need to be proactive. Okay, I'm saying something that everybody believes in, but you're saying, how do you get the budget? First off, I do apologize. I'm a fee-based agency. I don't take 1 penny of taxpayer money. It's all based on fees. My fiduciary is to the fee payer, not necessarily the taxpayer. So based on that, I can have a very frank discussion with my CFO and my colleagues, my other C-level colleagues, to ensure that cyber is first and foremost in the line. We have 3 areas of cyber too that we have to budget for. Remediation is the first because that we're behind. Number 2 is cyber hygiene. You got to make everyone aware. Don't press the link. And make it fun, provide incentives that people and employees do. But the third one, of course, is your insider threat. You need to have a program to ensure that people aren't being extorted. It's not that you don't trust your people, you're just providing them some protection so they can't be extorted. That's the way I would answer it.
Thanks, Jamie. Anyone else care to jump in on that?
I'll jump in there. I think another piece to add to what Jamie talked about, it's really tied that cybersecurity risks and opportunities to the business function, right? Making sure that senior leadership can see the business value in investing in cybersecurity, and specifically a cybersecurity operations center, because that's a huge investment. It's a huge investment, and if you can really show the business value, you tend to have a better chance of getting buy-in and investment. And the second piece of that is just having that relationship, building a relationship across the C-level suite, right? That also helps.
It's great feedback. So Guy, just to follow on to your comments. So when we talk about having the other leaders understand that, do you think it's mission impacts is a component of that, or what do you think really, what attaches the mission people most directly to that?
So if you are showing the business value, showing how cyber risk impacts the business function itself, whether it's the mission of the agency or the business function of the agency, and you can tie the cybersecurity risk or the impact of a breach to the business itself, it does tend to send a strong message, and it tends to show that cybersecurity is not just on the fringe, right? It is part of the business process itself. It is part of the mission.
It's great. Gerald, I saw you nodding your head a little bit. Anything you'd like to add?
No, my head was just getting heavy. No, one of the things, just take like a denial of service attack, right? Let's say, there's a denial of service against an ISP. Now I have a whole office that can't work, for example. Or, I can put costs together of, what we pay those folks compared to the cost of, what it takes to now recover. Well, first evict. If it's somebody that got inside the network or something, or do what kind of eviction remediation that needs to happen, and all those resources that come to bear when these things kind of happen. If you can take those kind of realities and those kind of scenarios and start putting those side by side, you'll see it's pretty costly when you try to get, sometimes you have to bring in an outside third party that's good at bringing these tools and things, and that's it's pretty costly when you see, the work that could be done, if availability was there, versus now let's bring all these forces to bear to evict, remediate, recover, all those things. So, a denial of service, you could use that as an example. Jamie talked about, ransomware. You could draw up all these examples, and usually, executives that I've dealt with, they want to see numbers side by side, so I kind of keep it simple around confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and run scenarios around those kind of things. It's like, all right, if things aren't available, what's the cost lost? Now I have 20 people at this one office that can't work. All right, we know how much we pay those folks. Now I bring to bear all these, without a SOC, and I'm just reacting like I don't want to be, like Jamie's talking about, is now I bring all these forces to bear, remediate, evict. You can have these side by side costs. But I'm with, as Jamie said, assume breach. It's gonna happen. So you got to do the best to mitigate what you what you don't want to happen. So you want to mitigate, make sure that you have good plans in place. Definitely have a severe incident response plan. Know the roles, because you don't want to be figuring out why you're going through this. I've seen that firsthand, where it's like, all right, who's doing what, who's on first, and who's making decisions at the end of the day. You got to have a plan. You got to go in and you got to practice the plan, and definitely practice that plan over and over. Tabletop exercise, have a scenario, go through that scenario, make sure the right people are doing the right roles, and so that you are able to recover fully, and make sure that you have all the lessons learned that you learned throughout that, and have an after action review after as well, and improve on that plan. Even from the tabletop exercises as well, have a good after action replan, and always be revisiting that. It should be a living, breathing thing, and everybody know their roles, because if we're reactionary, And it's like, all right, who's doing what? It can be, you can get yourself in a worse mess than what you're already in. So definitely have a good plan put in place with a good RACI matrix.
Great feedback, Gerald, really appreciate that. So kind of staying in the same theme of mission and business elements, Wes, what do you think are the key metrics to define success when you're talking about a SOC or cyber operations, particularly when you're messaging that to senior management? What do you think some of those key KPIs or metrics are?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And and my colleagues in Colonel Southern and Sergeant First Class Murphy coined it well. I think it starts with the relationships. And to get back to your earlier question about how to enable funding for the right tools, for the right people, and how to put that forward into the C-level suite or into a business context that they understand. Bottom line is it starts with relationships. I mean, you're not going to get anything done, as everybody's aware of, without positive relationships and a trusted relationships. And furthermore, once you have those relationships, you have to put it into a business context. You know, you have to put it, as was said by Gerald, into data integrity, data confidentiality, and availability, because those are metrics that people understand. Those are things that align to the business. If you don't have availability of the information and the tools to do your daily job, then that affects your bottom line. And furthermore, if that is not secure data, then you don't know. Somebody mentioned earlier that the insider threat piece is just as important as the other pieces. If you look at the metrics and things like that, insider threats are actually larger in percentage than outside threats. So you have to have the right training program established internally, and you have to really be the bad guy, if you will, in pushing your other people that may not be cyber aware to understand what the costs are if they click on a link, or if they open an email that they shouldn't open, or whatever the case may be. So I just think you know, if you present the metrics properly through KPIs and things like that, that you can get your message across, and you can get the funding that you deserve, and also show that like Jamie said, that the bottom line is, look, threats are going to happen. So we can either be proactive in our state in regards to how we're setting up our programs and how we're being proactive in responding or mitigating, but we also need to be proactive. A better offense is always better than a better defense.
Thanks. Anyone else have thoughts on some of these metrics or some of the KPIs that you might want to use to define success of your operations?
It's just one other thing I think I'll add is, you know, it's not always a malicious thing, that a malicious person that is doing is a threat. It's the person just trying to get their job done, get their mission done. And if security is too strict, what do? They're going to find a workaround, and they're going to try to do that. Why do I say that's important? Because if they're able to work around it, even though they're not trying to be malicious, guess what? A malicious actor can leverage that as well. So you got to pay attention to those types of things as well, because malicious actors could take advantage of those. So when you have those things and you learn about people just trying to get their job done and how they did it, and it's like, well, hey, that kind of went around, you know, the guidelines and the security and the governance that we have in place. Pay attention to those too, and figure out, all right, what do I got to do to mitigate against that? Because a malicious actor, a malicious insider, whether it be an insider or what, is going to also leverage that potentially. So I think keying on those things is very important.
Thanks, Gerald. Jamie, Tugai, any thoughts on what reports you'd like to see? What kind of elements show success to you?
Yeah, so from metrics perspective, you have those technical metrics, and I think most organizations, most cybersecurity programs do a good job at tracking vulnerability against remediation, uptime, downtime, right? But there's those other metrics that are most business centric that I have a challenge with, and I'm sure most other programs have a challenge with. It's taking those, measuring the productivity of the investment of the organization into cybersecurity, and tying that to the overall return on investment of value that it adds to the business. How much is it saving? how much is your phishing program or phishing training program is saving the business? Those kind of metrics are also very important. And it takes time to formulate and brainstorm and figure out how to visualize and how to present it. But those are very important, and it speaks to senior leadership and business owners.
Okay. Jamie, any other thoughts on that question?
Oh yeah, I could riff all day on it. The fact of the matter is, the best way to do things to get that business value you're talking about, sit around the table with your fellow colleagues, your chief executives, whatever it might be, and then say, okay, imagine this. You've been breached. You can't operate because the first thing to do is figure out what happened, why it went down. So you have to stop everything in place. How is that going to affect your business? Oh, you're being extreme. Don't do that. That's not going to happen. No, it's going to happen if we don't plan for it. So what is the value of your customers not being able to get to you? What is the value of your workers not being able to do their job because they're prevented from getting in on a remote basis into your network because you've just had a breach? You can't afford to open up because you don't know what's wrong yet. How long can you go without having to open up? Or how long does it take you to go to your alternate site and start processing again? If you don't have those real basic business unit explanations and exercises and thought process, you will really succumb to a cyber attack, period.
One of the things that comes up when we start talking about how do we put that business case forward, I find that a lot of at least state and local agencies that we support through our managed security services, they really like that managed security services model. They get a fixed price. They know what it's going to be. They're getting the tools, they're getting the people all at the same time and the experts. What is the federal government's thinking, or has that ever been weighed, to completely kind of like take an outsourced model versus, what level of control is necessary over a cyber ops environment? Who would like to take that one first?
So I will jump in there. I think there are time and places for a managed service for outsourcing within the federal government, but you will find that most agencies within the federal government, most organizations within the federal government have additional requirements around integrity and confidentiality of data that they process, right? That require a level of control. From my personal perspective, I do feel that parts and pieces of a cybersecurity operation can be outsourced, but some of it has to be remain within house to really be productive and to really add value to the business. So when you think of threat hunting, forensic analysis, I believe that those kind of functions should remain within an organization. Vulnerability scanning, vulnerability analysis, or some of the remediation activities around that can be outsourced. So I think I see a hybrid approach to whether in-sourcing or outsourcing SOC capabilities.
Yeah, I could riff off that a little. The fact of the matter is, size matters. So we're talking about large organizations. If you're talking about small and medium-sized businesses, they don't have the resources to do all that. What the heck is penetration testing? What do you mean threat hunting? I don't know what a red team is versus a blue team. Come on, right? So the fact of the matter is, size matters, and you have to appropriately pick the tool that applies to the size. Now, if you want to outsource and do all these high-speed things, that's a great thing for a small and medium-sized business, because then you could listen to the experts explain how all this technology actually affects your business. But even in the large businesses, one thing that should apply across the board, no one should tell you how to do continuity of operations. You should describe how the business will continue to operate. You're just relying on the experts to tell you the time that it takes to get back and to have the SLAs at an appropriate level such that you're paying for what you want. There are some people that can't afford the tool to be down, period. Therefore, they're paying a lot higher. And they'll try to get other people who don't have that need to pay higher too. So when you have the managed service provider, you really got to look at what you're buying and then figure it out from the experts so that you're not buying above and beyond what you really need. It does go down to what the mission of the business is and how you plan to continue operations.
I think, Kevin, that one size doesn't fit all. I think that's a message on that one. I mean, it has its right place for certain businesses, certain companies, even as mentioned by Mr. Andrews, the government, and the way that they utilize and leverage it for certain things. But it's just like the team, the tools, everything, everything that you do. It's not a one size fit all. I mean, there's certain aspects of different availabilities of things, and funding is unfortunately is a key metric for that. So it's not a one size fit all for everything. You can take pieces and parts from each to develop your different levels and layers of your SOC cybersecurity operations, and piece and part them together just as long as they work for you. I mean, that's, it doesn't have to be something overly elaborate. And it doesn't have to, I don't have to have every single best tool that's available out there, but I do need to have some things. I need to have visibility of end to end of my network. I need to do continuous monitoring. I need to have some sort of AI, ML, natural language processing type tool sets that separate the data so that my subject matter experts, my analysts and my defenders can get to the right data to find out what's right and what's wrong, and where's it really coming from, and who's it really coming from, what they're trying to do. So I don't think there's a one size fit all for that, or even for anything that we talk about across our security operations centers.
And that's absolutely right. Being small, one of those small places, for instance, my trusted internet connection, which is part of my security stack, right, is we use a private company to provide those services. We are looking at SOC as a service. There's another agency that provides it, and it's been certified by DHS, because I'm resource limited in those things, and I want to maximize my resources to do things that are more mission related. So so that's something that we definitely are looking at, to look at SOC as a service. I say that, but at the same time, even though I am using somebody else as a service, I'm still ultimately responsible as a CIO. I can never forget that. It's the same thing when I have discussion with people with the cloud, right? It's FedRAMP, and they put their data in the cloud. It's still your data. You're still responsible. If it's a SaaS environment, you're still responsible for that darn 10% of that configuration. You're still responsible for monitoring the logs. You're still responsible. That SaaS, they have a NOC, they have a SOC, they're monitoring the environment and the platform as a whole, but they're not monitoring your data. That's still your responsibilities. And that goes for even with outsourcing some of these things. So you still have to know, and you still have to have that visibility and understand what your risk posture is at any given day and any given time, even though if you are outsourcing these services. But for somebody the size of my office, it's definitely something that we're looking into. So I can maximize the use of my resources for more mission related things, as I mentioned.
That's great, Gerald. That's a good point. A lot of people think about risk option being transfer. In the federal government, it's kind of hard to transfer that risk, right? I mean, the taxpayers are looking to you to do your job. You've got fiduciary responsibility. So, that transfer option doesn't work so well in the federal model. That's a great point to have brought out, Gerald. Okay, so let's move on to the next section. Let's talk about people a little bit. So one of the questions we have here is just describing the process of hiring and training SOC analysts and keeping their knowledge and skills up to date, and also just kind of over time what that life cycle looks like. Let's see, Tagai, do you have any thoughts on that question?
So I think SOC analysts are one of those areas within our industry that there's a high attrition rate, right? People come and go that so often because I think we tend to forget that the balance of life, working life in that role, in that position, having someone sit at a desk or in front of the screen for 8 or 10 hours, right? That's tough. And it's shift work, right? So you have people working in the morning, people working mids, people working nights. It does have an impact on individuals' life outside of work. So put the focus on balancing work and personal life is important. And also creating a path for career growth is also important in that to improve the performance of a SOC analyst within your operation. So those are the two areas. And when we think of creating career path, that also comes with training too, to allow people to advance, to people to see room for growth within their career.
That's great. Someone else have thoughts on retention and training of SOC analysts or people in general?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think all of us here, as well as the folks that are attending this, can attest to the many challenges that are out there right now with keeping good folks, retaining them. How do you incentivize them? How do you develop the training plan, as Mr. Andrews said, on growth for them, right? And you're fighting against a lot of different things now, because folks in the cyber arena have their choice of jobs now, and they have their choice of pay. And so, it's kind of like, the federal programs that have been set up across DOD or even through DHS that are trying to infuse cyber talent into the government positions. They're having a hard time doing so and meeting those requirements, and the work and the right talent has always been a problem. And we have been severely shortened and hampered by the fact that we just do not have enough talent. And growing that pipeline and maintaining that pipeline of personnel is key, because if we don't do it, we're going to fall further behind. But I mean, the right team, you got to kind of look at it from how you break down your team. And I think Colonel Sutherland said it earlier when he was briefing, that I don't give a damn about certifications. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I've seen resumes that have had every cert under the sun, and you go and ask them basic questions and they don't know. And why is that? Because for the majority of folks that list every, a ton of certs, and we've all seen it. I mean, and it's nothing new. They don't have the experience level, right? And they don't have hands-on keyboard, and they haven't been in a SOC or in a cyber program that forces them to truly execute on the tasks that are at hand, whether it be, system intelligence monitoring, whether it be alert management, incident response, incident analysis, threat hunting, intrusion detection, whatever, however you break down your team. But the bottom line is, it gets back to, we've got to continue to train the right folks, invest in them like they expect them. Because if not, we're going to lose them. And it's a challenge across the board, from the federal folks, from getting government folks into the cyber program. And it's certainly a challenge across industry, and even for small, medium-sized businesses to compete with the Booz Allens, the GDITs, the Northrops, all those guys that can pay, in some cases 2-3 times what a small business can pay. And so, I hate to say it, but money's a factor, right? So I'll open that up for discussion.
Oh, I love it. If you're not talking about the 800-pound gorilla, come on, right? Yeah. Money is the motivation.
Yes, sir.
Now, I don't go to work for free. Okay, let's get that established. But then again, I was in both the commercial world and the military, as well now in the federal government. And what I've found most success with the federal government is to attract those early adopters. In other words, your entry-level guys out of college, the ladies who are coming with engineering degrees in cyber, who are really wanting to get that experience. Because although you have a certification or a degree, so what? What would you do in this position? You can conjecture all you want until you've actually done it, until you've thwarted a distributed denial of service, until you've tracked down a cyber threat hunter with a honeypot. you don't know what's going on. You really don't know how to do a trace route. Sorry. So anyway, I take experience over cert anytime.
Any
All right.
day.
Given that, there's the junior side, then there's the senior side. So what I've found success also in is appealing to people's patriotism and the challenge of the job. So that's the second careerists, right? The guys that are coming out of the military, the veterans. I'm trying to get those ladies to understand that we have a job here and a mission to protect the intellectual property of the United States. And that appeals to them. And so they have found a second career in doing that. Now, you do have to take care of your people. And there's a lot of mid-careerists who I found who really want to get into cyber. So that's when the training comes in. Oh, I don't know a thing. I can't do this. Have you thought about cyber? You know that we have a shortage. If you were to apply your great skills in management and program management and project management, maybe you could actually learn this expertise. You send them to training and you show the investment in your current employees such that you're providing them the opportunity to get up in their career. So I think there's that trifecta: entry level, junior, senior, second careers, and the middle out. You try to hit it in that regard, and I think you'll have a good thing in recruiting.
Great points.
Gerald, any other thoughts?
God, no. I've got to send Jamie my resume because I know how to do trace route and I can do a ping too. No, I mean, I can't add any more because I totally agree with everything that's been said on this. Is definitely, you know, I want to maximize the use of my employees. I don't just want them sitting there twiddling thumbs. Making sure that they're getting the latest and greatest information because the threat is always changing. It's ever evolving. It's, we're not dealing with the script kiddies necessarily. We're dealing with nation states. So, understanding what's going on in the world is very important. So making sure that they have that pipeline to information coming in so that they can understand what the potential threats are is very important. But I mean, everything that's been said, it's like I cannot add a cherry on top of that. It's been said perfectly.
Yeah, so some great comments here. I think one of the things, at least on the contractor side, that is interesting, particularly in DoD, right? So you've got the 8570. So your people have to have certain certifications. We're sometimes looking at labor categories, it's must have 5 years of experience and this certification. But that doesn't necessarily, I get what everyone's saying, it's really important. It doesn't translate into practical skill set, right? So I think, Jamie kind of mentioned some other attributes that when we're looking for staff that could be helpful, whether is it someone that's hungry? Is it somebody who's got a lot of resourcefulness and is able to, transition in their career? So I think there's some great comments there. Anybody else have any thoughts on people before we move on to processes? All right. Okay, so next section, we'll talk a little bit about processes. So does anyone have thoughts on how do we reduce cost and increase efficiency? Or any success stories there? Jamie.
Well, yeah, now you've pushed my button and I can go crazy now. All right. The first thing to realize is if security is all about compliance, we've failed already. It's not about compliance. That's an after the fact. Hey, let's check our quality after you built something. I mean, knock it off. This is ridiculous. And everybody is rallying around, well, you got to get the checklist done. Who cares? I'm almost at my wit's end. So compliance is not where it's at. Where it is at is getting the cyber engineers together with your network engineers, with your developers, and designing the security from the beginning. Okay, we got 5 areas of zero trust, right? You got users, you got data, you got application, you got network, and you got devices. Notice that users and devices wrap around the ZTA. We have to provide a trust environment such that we know who our users are and we know what our devices are. Everybody is going after the network. That's not as important as users and devices when you're trying to create trust, because you don't transact with network, you transact across the network. And so the whole thing is we should use the right pillar at the right time. So in costing, we waste so much money on an ATO or an SSP or whatever it is, and we never conduct the exercise. We never do the red team. We never do the penetration test. Knock it off. Do the work. Get off your butt. Oh, but you have to do the documentation. You know something? I'm going for something now called a minimally compliant application. What does that mean? In other words, I'm going to do the minimum required to make sure I get something done, because that gives me time then to increase my security in the next sprint. It's not all for nothing. Incremental change and evolution is so much better than revolution. Oh, don't worry, we'll wait until the next rev comes. Meanwhile, you're exposed. Fix it now. Get off your butt. That's what I say.
Hallelujah. That's all. Definitely. There is compliance and effectiveness are two totally different things. So provide authentication, username and password. I'm compliant. We all know that's not effective. They're two different things. So absolutely agree with Jamie. I've been saying the same thing, is the way we do things is gotta change. Compliance has a place. I'm not saying totally get rid of compliance. There is some place for compliance, but I would rather be effective and let compliance fall in place behind it. If I'm effective and I can prove my effectiveness in my cybersecurity environment, that's what I'm keyed on. So that's definitely why I'm a big believer in zero trust, and the things that Jamie was talking about. You know, at the end of the day, I want to protect the data, and that's what my key is. You know, right data to the right users at the right time. It's very judicious, treating the devices like data, and around that application. You know, that's what's facilitating access between users and data. So what am I doing around that application? So definitely I'm pushing towards effectiveness. Now we've actually had studies where people have taken a perfectly ATO'd system, gone through all the 853 controls, and they're all good, but then they put in another column of zero trust principles, and guess what? Doesn't do very good when you talk about zero trust, that same application. So yes, so totally different things. But talking about the technology as well, is I don't want, I would not, I'd rather have, people are very important in cybersecurity. I'm not going to dismiss that whatsoever. But of course, I don't want my great, awesome cybersecurity folks, you know, sitting in a SOC dealing with a bunch of false positives. I want them dealing with the things that really need to be dealt with, and for the expertise that I've hired them for. So where I can automate, not replacing people, but where I can automate the mundane things, the well-known things, I'm going to want to do that so I can get the maximum output of the people that I've hired to do the cybersecurity aspect as well. So doing automation in the right way, not making sure that I'm not masking things and just fixing things and masking it, but understanding that, yes, we totally understand what this is, and getting rid of some of those false positives and those mundane things, so that when there's a real threat, there's a real thing that they need to pay attention to, I'm using and maximizing their expertise in order to deal with that. So that's another way I would look to use the technology as well. As we move to zero trust and bringing that up, it's going to be a different posture, it's a different culture, it's a different mindset, and taking in all these factors that you have to take to make those decisions. Do I give Jamie access to that high level data? Based on all these factors, I got to make those decisions. So understanding what those risk postures are and those thresholds that allow or not allow, or do I give them read only, give them full access? You know, those things got to be in place. So, you know, you want people to understand what that's doing. So I think machine learning and AI can be a huge help in understanding, because I think some agencies, when you really talk to them, you really get them to admit, some of them, what is normal? If you ask them the simple question of what does normal look like, that's a difficult question for them. And, you know, I need to know what normal looks like as best I can, so that I can react to, you know, I said react, so I don't want to be react. I know we said we want to be proactive, but when abnormal happens or something happens that is not baseline, you know, address it the right way. I think people have difficulty with what normal looks like, what data flows look like. And I'm not saying network flows, I'm saying data flows. I want to understand where my data is going, because that's what I want to protect. You know, is it flowing here to there? Is that right? You know, so it's good to understand those things.
So Guy, Wes, any thoughts on processes? We talked about efficiency. We talked a little about compliance versus effectiveness, and the practical aspects of getting the job done. And it seems like we're leaning into a little bit of being able to use some automation or some use cases where just going beyond maybe people in terms of processes could be useful.
Yeah, I think effectiveness leads to compliance. Compliance is a byproduct of effectiveness. And so that's the right way to approach it. Rather than through the lens of compliance, let's look through the lens of effectiveness and productivity. That will breed compliance. And to be effective, you have to streamline. And to streamline, you definitely have to standardize and document. So I always tell my people, right? If we're going to do something, let's document, let's whiteboard it, let's look at what we're trying to do. And then that's the way we can tend to streamline and make it more effective, make that process more effective. And to streamline things, you also then have to include automation and machine learning, because everything cannot be done manually, right? Or be done sequentially. So automation plays a key part, and that's how we tend to become effective, and we also tend to get cost savings, right? Because you can't always go back to the to senior leadership and just always asking for more money, right? To manage your program, you have to show the cost saving that you also bring into as a value to the business.
Thanks, Wes. You're on mute.
My apologies. I'll add to that. I think when we talk about processes and procedures, something that may or may not get addressed as often as it should. We talked about exercises a little bit earlier. If you're not running your folks through exercises, and you're just waiting till the game starts, if you will, when you get a breach, that's very telling from a standpoint of where it ranks on your priority list, because the exercises is repetition. It's just like battle drills, right? And just repetition builds skills. You have to, because it also identifies when you're going through those exercises of an attack or whatever, a mitigation, whatever the case may be. It really identifies any skill gaps you have within your people, right? And that's critical, because you may not know what those skill gaps are until the game starts, right? And I think another facet that we don't talk enough about within those skill sets and within the context of exercises, do our folks really know what the facets are of an attack or vulnerabilities and how they're exploited? And what tools are used effectively and either on our side or the other side from the attack surface. I don't know that that's true, that if you break it down and you sit down with your folks and you ask them to walk you through an anatomy of an attack, how many of those folks can answer that question, right? And if they're the defenders and the analysts, I mean, in my mind, they all should be versed in that. They may not be doing that specific job currently, but it applies certainly to their current job and how it contributes to the overall picture and the functionality and efficiency of the processes and the team.
It's great. Some really great feedback there. I think some of the themes we've been talking about is kind of summarizing what Jamie was talking about, taking a more agile approach, right, to things, and making effectiveness more iterative, seeing compliance as the guy was saying is kind of like an outflow of the work that's actually being done, that's practical and of highest importance, which is, you don't want to say, well, I can't get to this incident right now because I'm completing the paperwork and it's going to take me 10 minutes, right? No, you got to respond, right? All right, the last section here is one of my favorites, and several of our questions are related to this, and I know we've started shifting into this a little bit in our conversation. Last area is technology. So technology, of course, is the goal, I think, is to help us keep up with emerging threats, help us keep up with the real world adversarial approaches that are, these TTPs that are growing every day, and APTs that are getting smarter all the time and harder to find. Okay, so in terms of technology, what are the core capabilities of a modern SOC? Specifically, we think about what tools are essential. What do you have to have? Kind of technology-driven tools. Who would like to start that one for us?
All right, I'll jump in there. I think at the heart of a SOC operation or SOC capability is a solid, real structure SIM, right? At the heart of that. And then building upon the SIM is your automation and orchestration piece. So I think if you have those two, a set of solutions in place, and not just having the solution in place, but having to fine tune and operating as intended is key.
That's a great point. So technology is not an end unto itself, right? It's a means to an end. It's a great point. So Guy.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. I mean, I think that's great because I go back to the basics. Sometimes we get so enamored with tools and all of that, and we forget the basic blocking and tackling, right? So, I mean, tools are great, and the technology that is out there can certainly help us. And as Gerald said, we're not trying to replace people, but we're trying to implement processes that can aid our folks in doing better, and that includes, as we talked about, zero trust architecture, obviously threat intelligence tools, compliance, all of that, all of those tools, the SEAM architecture that shows us what's happening, and then certain things. I like the SOAR model from the orchestration standpoint, because I think in a SOC it kind of goes to how mature the SOC is, of the orchestration of what's happening within the SOC, and how our folks are orchestrating things that are happening and working together, collaborating, and how that whole team functions. It's got to be a mature model there. So I think when you're looking at tools, and interoperability is a key point. We have all these tools. Somebody said it earlier. We have all these tools, and the greatest thing since sliced bread here and there. Let's look at our tool sets, and let's really define which tool sets are really the effective and efficient tool sets that are enabling our people, and giving us the data that we need to be able to respond or mitigate. And they have to be functional, and they have to be future proof. I mean, you're always getting the greatest things since sliced bread, but there's key points in that we have to certainly take into account and remember, when we're trying to get to that, look at the blinky lights, and that's the greatest thing, and let's bring it in, and and really understand what it provide us, because there's so many tool sets out there, and everybody's been a part of it. This vendor comes in, and he's giving you his greatest, all the buzzwords and all of that stuff, and you're like, yeah, what's it really doing for me, man? I don't want to hear all that garbage. Just tell me what it's doing for me, and is it interoperable with what I currently have, or should we replace? And what's the functionality that it gets to, and furthermore, what is the future proofing of it? I don't want to have to buy a tool today and then replace it 2 years down the road for the next blinky light thing, right?
I love that, because I can't agree with you more, Wes. And to Guy, of course, the basis of all security operations centers must be a SIEM and having that orchestration. However, let's think about this too, right? We've talked about people, process, and now we're talking about tools. And tools can be physical and or logical.
Yeah.
Now, most of the time we're doing this cyber stuff, it's all logical, that we rarely do we touch the physical aspects of it. But the thing is, we really do need to think of these tools in the physical sense as well, because just like a shovel, if the shovel is doing its job, why do you need the brand new shovel? I mean, what is the brand new shovel going to do that the old shovel doesn't do? And when you put it in those physical terms, you can actually really understand what the industry is trying to give you or not give you. All right. We said fit for purpose. It's a great line, because The mission of a bakery is such that baking cakes and baking pies, I might not need a security operations center. That's the absurd example, right? So what tools are they going to use? They're going to probably outsource to somebody else to make sure their network and their ordering system that they go off of are secure and they don't go out of business. They can still take those orders. That's great. When we put together a security operations center, the tools are probably the easiest part because it's all about the people and the process. Because what are you trying to get to? If it's always about monitoring, you get into that problem where you have all these false positives because you got the greatest tools, but you can't really sift through them. Right. So then it's the people and what they can do with it. I love what Jerry was saying before about AI. We are using AI at the Patent and Trademark Office not to replace people, but to augment them. So now I don't even call it artificial intelligence anymore. I call it augmented intelligence. And you augment your workers such that they can now do the analysis that AI can't do. Remember, AI is just fancy programming. Oh, yep. But they can glean insights that I can't. Well, only because you have to sleep and have to eat. And the computer right now is running overnight. So realize it takes big data analytics a long time to glean these ideas. You could do the same. You just don't have the time. That's the mundane part. Give the mundane things such that you get rid of false positives and use AI to your advantage. It's augmentation. Don't be afraid of it.
I love that. That's awesome. That's true.
I don't know why anybody didn't say they just want a nice big monitor. I mean, that's the kind of technology I want to see all this stuff. But I don't know how many people. I'm sure we've all had the vendor that comes in and say, "Hey, we give you a single pane of glass," and I wish I had a bucket of rocks I could throw through that glass. That's one of the things is to have the SEAM and the SOAR and all that is. There's always these stovepipes of excellence. And, being in operations, we used to go do this round robin thing, right? Somebody would look at their tool and interpret it, and this is what it says. All right. And then we determine this is where it ain't. And then we go, this is where it ain't. This is where it ain't. And we keep going this round robin and trying to manually make sense of what this tool's saying and what that tool's saying. And, being able to integrate and get things to talk the same language and understand what really you're looking at, because so much resource time I've seen over the years is interpretation of one tool versus another and figuring out which one is right. Where we can integrate these things and make the sense of them so that we can readily enact upon them or understand them, because different things interpret things in different ways. But I can't, there's a lot of resource time I've seen over the years spent on, especially in operations, trying to figure out where it ain't, where it is, kind of thing. So, integration is going to be very important with zero trust, which we mentioned, and making sense, because you're not going to have time to index data and, make it structured and then make a decision on it. It's got to be as real time as possible. So you want these tools that can interpret this data and make the decisions based off the policy, processes, and procedures that you tell them that you want.
Great feedback. I think, in terms of technology, one of the greatest things I've seen come around so far is the EDR and XDR capabilities. You're able to ingest all these additional details of processes on the boxes. You're not just pulling Microsoft logs. You're getting all this detailed stuff. You can do forensics. It's much faster mean time to resolve these cases and do analysis on the data right in front of you. So I think there's been some good stuff there. Just for time's sake, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. So again, I want to thank you all for your time. This has been a phenomenal panel, some phenomenal discussions. One of the best I've seen. So thank you all for your time. Much appreciated. I'll be handing it back over to Sabari.
Of course. Okay, so yeah, I was going to say, well, what a interesting discussion. That was an outstanding, sort of the sharing of thoughts on security operations, various different facets. So thank you, Kevin, for driving this very energetic and insightful discussion. And many thanks to our panelists, our distinguished panelists, Jamie, Togai, Gerald, and Wes, for sharing your perspectives with us all, and the lively discussion that just, that we just saw. So Electrosoft, wants to join, in thanking our distinguished keynote speakers, SFC Paul Murphy and Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Sutherland, for the wonderful keynote talk that we heard earlier today. And of course, our outstanding panelists and moderator for the panel that just concluded right now. And appreciation to our media friends for supporting today's special event. In terms of, just highlights for me, I was just taking some notes during the lively discussion. I love the concept of, assume a breach, and then what will you do next? Are you ready for the breach that's invariably going to happen? Also, the thoughts around, the size of the organization may dictate the decision to outsource some or part of the activities of a security operations, of security operations. But also, as Gerald mentioned, regardless of outsourcing, you still own the responsibility. And then also, there were so many good thoughts. I think Togai came in and talked about certain functions within security operations that may be more easily outsourced than others. And Jamie, of course, talked about so many different excellent points, but I love the augmented intelligence versus artificial intelligence. It's really here to help the people that we have. Anyway, I guess to wrap it all up, thank you again to everybody. And let's see, we do have, we want to recognize, Wes and the Foxhole Technology folks for being our event sponsor. So thank you very much, Wes, for not only sponsoring, but also taking part in our excellent panel. Let's see what else. I think there's the last few administrative items. So we will have a survey for this event, come up as soon as the event is over. So I would like to encourage everybody who attended to provide some feedback. We really utilize the feedback, leverage it to see how we can do better and better each time we hold these events. Again, to repeat, our recording for this event, the full event has been recorded and it will be available on demand, and it'll be on the Electrosoft website in a couple of days. And finally, thank you to everybody for doing such a wonderful job sharing your thoughts and sharing again, perspectives with the community. This is how we learn together and do better in protecting our government and our private organizations from these pesky cyber attackers, I guess, threat actors. So thank you very much. And there's the survey. Take care.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta.